Okay, those numbers seem to have stopped ticking up quite so quickly. So we will begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Retention Social Care webinar today. My name is Amanda Marquez, and I'm one of the owners of Cohesion. We've been really flattered by the number of attendees and the interest in this event. But of course, it's really a telltale sign of the very difficult environment that we're all in at the moment. So for those of you who don't know who we are and what we do, Cohesion are a recruitment and workforce solution provider. We specialise in social care and early talent, recruiting nationally in all care settings for all types of providers. And we're also advocates for the sector, promoting the opportunities available in social care via care and support jobs, where you can post your vacancies with no cost, sponsoring a PhD that researched what makes the very best frontline workers, sharing our best practice through toolkits, clients and non-clients alike, and taking part in industry initiatives such as Care Home Open Week and Now Care, but more on this later. You know, we've always been fascinated by what makes a great hire, using data and evidence to deliver better recruitment results for our clients. And what our data is telling us now, and I know this isn't a surprise to any of you here, is that while social care recruitment has never been easy, it is now more challenging than at any time in the last 10 years. But of course, you all know that there is no one factor, but rather many that are contributing to this. And with, of course, the recent additions of, or more recent additions of Brexit, COVID, and dare I say it, mandatory vaccinations. So we have a very packed agenda for you today, which includes our very own Dave Beasley, Social Care Talent Director at Cohesion, and Anna Posse, our Exit and Retention Manager. Dave and Anna will be sharing our findings from our assessment of thousands of interviews that have been completed during the last 18 months. And the findings and insights come with recommendations, but word of warning, just like there is no one factor responsible for where we are now, there is no one factor that is going to transform the results. After we've finished, we'll be handing over to Amanda Ashworth, Project Manager, Capacity and Transformation, and Juliet Green, Project Manager, Workforce Capacity and Transformation at Skills for Care. They're going to be speaking about values, culture, and well-being. A really hot topic at the moment, and actually, you know, unsurprisingly, very closely linked to retention. And more we're hearing about the impact of COVID on well-being and mental health. There are some, of course, we've had the opportunity to look through the presentation ahead of time, and there are some really helpful directions, tools, and content that I'm sure will help your teams and leaders at this difficult time and beyond. James Sage, Health and Social Care Partner at Royds, Withy King, will then be sharing how to create a positive retention environment and how to avoid key risk areas from a legal perspective. So before we start, the rules of engagement. Could you all please make sure that you're on mute? We are recording the session and we will be sharing the link after the event. To keep us to time as much as possible, we'll be gathering your questions for speakers during the presentation and coming to them at the end of the session. Given the size of the group today, we may not be able to cover all of them, but we will distribute all of the questions along with responses from the speakers after the event. And of course, James, Juliet, Amanda, Dave, Anna and I are all willing and able to have specific conversations beyond today. So please do put your questions in the chat. And I'll just mention that again. Could everyone go on mute, please?
You're thinking, oh, we're going to get...
Thank you. So do please put your questions in the chat. And now I'm going to hand over to you, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. That's perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And really pleased to be talking to you about this topic today. It's certainly one that is very, very hot at the moment and something we're all quite concerned about, unsurprisingly. So thanks for joining us. So just to set the scene to start and share with you the data and the information we've considered, we've analysed over 3,000 exit and retention interviews with care and support workers who have either just or recently joined a new care employer, or they've recently resigned. And the organisations range from a number of mid-sized care businesses right through to some of the largest care employers. What we've also done is included data from an ongoing survey that we run of applicants to care, and this includes over 1,600 responses that we've received to date. And as Amanda has said, our focus has been looking at the effect of the pandemic on the usual retention headlines, to share the recommendations to improve retention as much as we possibly can at this difficult time. Retention in social care, as we all know, is heading for a perfect storm at the moment, and unfortunately we expect that future reports that will find that the rate of turnover and that will be getting worse, unfortunately, and we think that we will be seeing it over the sort of the 30% we usually measure at. Now, Anna, who manages our retention and exit interview programs and joins me today, has created a couple of fictional care workers that she's going to help me describe to you. But what I will say is Anna talks to individuals in the team that conduct these surveys, talk to many individuals on a daily basis who give their points of view of working for care employers. So it's really good that we can introduce these characters to you, and once Anna has described those care workers, we can then look at focusing more closely on some of the issues that have been raised. So Anna, I'm going to bring you in to introduce our characters this morning.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, I would like to introduce two characters to you all. Whilst they are fictional, they are based on real comments and anecdotal data that we've collected in the 3,000 plus retention interviews that we've conducted. So firstly, I'll introduce to you Bob. Now, Bob is unhappy. He's been in his care role now for 3 months and he's feeling a bit overwhelmed and maybe a bit put on, if he's honest. Bob is still new to the role, but he is thinking of leaving. Bob's manager, he would say, is short on time, on temper, and also short on manners. She hasn't spoken to Bob much since he joined. He had wanted a one-to-one or a chat of some kind, but that just hasn't happened. Now he's witnessed how his manager has been talking to some of the other carers. He's not really sure he wants that one-to-one. He's avoiding her and keeping his head down. Bob thinks his manager is struggling too, and he does feel a bit sorry for her, as she's clearly not coping with the pressure. She's really just never really much around, so she's not visible, usually hunkered down in the office or occasionally rushing around on the phone. So for Bob, the expectation to do the extra hours was okay at first, but then as fatigue set in and the realization that help wasn't coming, that more and more people were leaving or off sick, it was just becoming increasingly hard for Bob to motivate himself to come to work. An occasional thank you for the extra effort would have gone a really long way, but it just wasn't forthcoming. The team's not the major issue. There's plenty of good people. They're all nice enough. They've helped him to learn the job and shown him things. Not everyone is doing everything the same way, so there's not really a lot of consistency, but he's muddled through. The few kind ones there, and of course the residents, are really the best part, the good part about coming to work. But then there's the clique of favourites, the ones who never get given the tricky residents to work with or never rotated onto the floor that nobody wants to work on. They can do no wrong as far as the manager's concerned, and yet Bob would say they are the biggest troublemakers, and lazy too. So, as you've heard, Bob hasn't had a good experience, and sadly, his story is a typical one. But to balance this out, there are also lots of positive stories that come out of our data. So let's look at the flip side. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mary. So Mary's happy. She's just coming up to her 3-month anniversary in her new role as a carer. She feels so settled and part of the team that it's really hard to believe that it's only been 3 months. Difficult to imagine working anywhere else now. Mary's 3-month review with her manager went really well. They'd already had a quick catch up last month, but it was still really good to get some real feedback and some areas to focus on. Mary feels she's learned so much already from her buddy, from her colleagues and the training programme, and she's really motivated now to continue her development. There just seems to be so much more scope for development in this sector than in her previous roles working in hospitality. Her manager is everywhere, always beaming positivity and lending support wherever she can. She has great ideas too. She's innovative and really quite inspirational at times, a good leader. She can be direct. Mary has got things wrong and her manager has fed this back, but respectfully and without patronising her, suggesting next time do it this way and explaining why this is the best way to do it. Mary would say her manager is fair and an excellent communicator. They're all working so hard at the moment. The team are pulling together and Mary is more than happy to give whatever extra time she has to work overtime. The manager always asks before adding her in for extra shifts. But while they are short-staffed, Mary is happy to do all that she can for the residents and the team. Mary feels it's more of a family now anyway. So we've met Bob and Mary now. I will hand you back to Dave to examine some of the issues raised by people like Bob and Mary in a little bit more detail, including the latest data and trends alongside some of our recommendations.
Thank you, Anna, that's great. So yes, during the pandemic, we've all welcomed many new starters to care, just like Mary. And our social care applicant survey, which has been running since 2018, has seen a 25% increase in applicants from other sectors. And to take that even further, for one of our clients that we've been working on a project with since January, recruiting in a range of areas, over 60% of applications have come from outside of the sector. So we've all seen people wanting to come and join the sector during the pandemic. We've also seen more examples of digitalisation in the recruitment process, not just with video interviewing to assess candidates remotely, but also during onboarding when it comes to inductions. So to give an example of one provider, during the height of the pandemic, we're holding online inductions every Tuesday and Wednesday. Following that on the Thursday would be their first day in the care home itself. And that worked really successfully to onboard candidates quickly, utilising online resources, but also backed up by the in-person induction that continued on day 3. We examined the latest data to try and establish 2 things mainly. How have care organisations adapted to the rise in new to care applicants? And also, what are the pros and cons of digital induction? But also, how should organisations get the best of both digital and face-to-face inductions in the future? So here's the good news to start with. We asked candidates to rate their induction from excellent through to poor, as well as other features such as work-life balance, relationships with colleagues. And the great thing is that the leavers inductions get the highest percentage of good and excellent ratings from leavers of the organisations that they're leaving. And 58% of leavers, who, let's face it, are often an employer's biggest critic, rate the induction well, which is really, really good to see. Similarly, at the first retention call, over 85% of staff in all of the organisations we conduct the surveys for rate inductions as good or excellent. So some really positive themes here. So is there anything to learn in terms of inductions and the impact on staff retention? Well, we wanted to look beyond the statistics really and see what comments we were hearing. So wanted to show you just a snapshot of some of the real life quotes that we are taking from some of our surveys. as you'll read, the themes that we are hearing at the moment, definitely it's been harder to get things done online because of COVID. Tours not being available to be conducted, which obviously means orientation is harder for new starters. New starters actually not receiving follow-up face-to-face training, particularly around things like moving and handling, and comments of online learning being boring in places, and that lack of interaction certainly being cited. Believe me, we are real advocates of online training and learning. We actually put online learning in our recruitment processes and pre-employment processes for our clients, and it has a real benefit for new candidates. But as any good learning provider will tell you, the content of how you engage learners is really important to think about. So don't just implement online learning and think that's that. Think about the content and how you engage with it, and we'll share some recommendations now. So consider what support those new to care might need specifically. We're bringing people in from other sectors, don't want to lose them, and we can't assume that they don't need a different type of support to those that work or have worked in care previously. But on the flip side, don't assume that those with experience don't need that as well. We can often work differently, so it's good to reflect on the different audiences that you're onboarding. Do ensure that it's interactive, not just online viewing. Think about those Q&A sessions, reflection, discussion that happens beyond that online tool that you might be using. Make sure that some of the induction is repeated face-to-face during those initial shifts. As I mentioned, moving and handling being one that comes up. Film tours if you need to. We've seen great examples of care homes film a walk around of the home that can actually be shared in the recruitment process beyond someone even walks through that door, especially if you're not conducting face-to-face interviews at the moment. And involve senior management as well. There's great examples out there of good luck messages and welcome videos from CEOs, directors, and we put them in the recruitment process, and candidates respond really well to that. But do this beyond recruitment too. Make it involved as part of that induction process. It can really have an impact. So our next theme that we've picked up from feedback from the surveys is buddy schemes. And we really wanted to explore the impact of buddying and give some examples of best practice from what we're seeing across the sector. And you really don't need me at the moment to tell you just how flat out managers are. The need for staff is critical right across the country. And we really understand that certain things can slip when we're going through such an extraordinary time. But we really need to make sure that the support is still there for our new starters and existing employees. And what the data is showing us is that new starters who have some type of buddy program when they joined are more likely to say they're happy. So 8% more likely to say they're happy at 4 weeks, 13% more likely to be happy at 8 weeks than those with no buddy system at all. Now you might say, well, those percentages seem quite low. But don't forget, any impact on retention is positive, and all gains are of course incremental. There's so many different factors that can have an impact. So still really important from the feedback that we're hearing. The quality of support, interaction, communication with care teams is regularly mentioned in the surveys, both good and bad. And good quality team support and atmosphere is often mentioned to balance any more negative feedback we might hear about managers. So you can see the impact of buddying and support from colleagues can sometimes level out the concerns that people might be raising. So again, some actual quotes from leavers, and again, hearing that colleagues are being there when managers are busy. But also the sheer effects that a poor manager and a poor manager's attitude can have on somebody. Yeah, it's really apparent in the feedback that we are receiving, especially at the moment. So on to our recommendations. Definitely feature buddy schemes consistently across the business. They should be supportive, they should be casual, they should be private. The buddy program should include a pre-start welcome. It should have an initial orientation meeting, just a simple tour of the home or service walked around by somebody already doing the job can be really, really helpful. And of course, buddies can successfully support with that acclimatization of the surroundings that they're going to be working in and the people that you support or your residents. So you can walk around and have a conversation around John, who loves listening to Elvis music. And hey, if you visit the coffee shop down the road, you might not know, but you'll get a carer's discount there. It's simple things like that that can really support the onboarding of a new starter. And it's important to train buddies as well. Give them the tools to get it right. Make sure they know what it means to be a good buddy. And I wanted to share a great example we've seen from Care UK recently. They encourage all staff members to opt in to getting involved with the buddy scheme. They highlight the benefits, including gaining training and qualifications and certification in that area. They join a network of buddies so that there's support between people. And of course, they get ongoing support from other teams such as learning and development. So obviously you need to make sure that you adapt to your organisation and your setup. But where we're seeing this, it's certainly coming through in the retention conversations that we're having with candidates as being important. Our next thing is working conditions. And it's not on the slide, but you won't be surprised that at the very start of the pandemic, issues around PPE availability was a regular discussion that came up. That's actually now returned to what we usually hear is, oh, I haven't had my uniform on day one, or just simple things that we usually hear have now returned. And we are hearing that people are feeling tired, they're exhausted as a result of COVID. You've got lots of research that's happened. So Work Foundation has found that 41%, unsurprisingly, of care workers have experienced increased workload due to the pandemic. Of course, restriction of staff movement has meant staff have been willing to take on more, and that's great. But now they're tired. And whilst we don't tend to hear the word burnout in conversations with the people we're liaising with, we certainly hear countless references to too many shifts, lack of flexibility, there's not enough staff, there's too many agency staff relied upon, and I'm just not getting the support. That is very much being heard at the moment. And in the years that we've been conducting these exit interviews and analysing the responses, the biggest reason of leavers has been the impact of a manager or management in general. If we look at our most recent exits data, so surely looking at the surveys we've completed in 2021, we've had a slight shift. So management has been pushed into second place. Now what people are telling us is that it's about lack of support and understaffing. So we've seen a slight shift this year. And other than pay, which I'm not going to focus on today because I know as a sector we would love to be able to fix the pay issue. We're not going to be able to overnight, as we know. Working conditions are the worst rated when we ask leavers to assess a number of elements of their former employer. So it's definitely a key theme. There's also references to ill health, so people leaving due to ill health, both physical and stress related. So it's really important to be reflecting on those. Okay, so some quotes again for you here. Staff, as we say, are feeling the pressure of our recruitment and retention challenge at the moment. And we're often told of extra pressure to work more hours, what was originally agreed, changing, and our concern around flexibility is that at the moment, the sectors and the opportunities and the care providers that are offering more and greater flexibility are actually winning slightly, and will win when it comes to the war that we've got at the moment, fighting for good talent. So on to our recommendations, and these are actually brought from the Social Care Institute for Excellence. They've cited some fantastic things that have been happening during the pandemic, and in our view should continue. So one care home had set up safe spaces where staff could take time out to relax and get peer support. Barchester have set up a support line for staff, giving them an opportunity to share any worries. And TLC have put mental health first aiders available in all of their homes. Senior management are hosting Q&A sessions fortnightly, and as we say, you know, these are great examples of things that have happened during the pandemic that should absolutely continue. Next theme, career development. So much research references lack of career prospects, and specifically vertical or management progression as a reason for turnover. And our data agrees, you know, progression opportunities are given the thumbs up by a low number of leavers. So only 24% say that the career progression available is positive. When we focused on looking at this data last time when we looked at it pre-COVID, we identified that almost 3/4 of interviewees in those early stages told us that an opportunity to develop in and beyond their current role was really important to them. As early as week 12, they were telling us this. And what we know this time is that whilst that's still the case, it doesn't just have to be vertical progression. So what we wanted to highlight this time was the far more significant reference that we're hearing in our data to training in regard to career specialism development. So let's share some quotes with you again. New starters are telling us that there is absolutely a desire to expand their knowledge in dementia, in diabetes, in learning disability courses, so much more. And those not listening to that and providing that specialist training might just be missing a trick here. So our recommendations: focus on enhancing specialist knowledge and qualifications over management. In the recruitment process, think about promoting specialist routes as well as the management opportunities. And yes, please do keep sharing the great examples of managers that have grown internally and started on the front line. But we all have those examples. What we don't all have is examples of specialists in certain areas. And this could be really a differentiator to other providers. And we've mentioned as well utilising tools that are available online, such as Care Character. For those of you that haven't spoken to us about Care Character, we'd love to take the conversation offline. It's a values-based online assessment tool which can support you to identify how candidates meet the 7 qualities of care that have been identified by the PhD study that Amanda mentioned earlier. And it's proving a really important in the recruitment process, supporting managers to identify good care workers, but also it's being brought in by providers to go beyond that recruitment process and supporting them to think about how we can develop people against those core traits that we know are so important. So as I say, do come and speak to us if you want any more information on that. Meetings with managers. So in a recent UK HA survey, flexible shift patterns for all staff and regular positive interaction with a line manager were all seen as most effective when tackling staff turnover. We know shift patterns and flexibility is a minefield. It's perhaps not an overnight fix, but do hear us when we say that those offering those flexible options are definitely widening the funnel. And of course, they're not pushing people to other sectors that are now beginning to reopen again. One thing that we do think we can get right now is the quality of manager interventions with staff. So in our retention data at 12 weeks, a third of respondents are yet to have a regular review catch up with their line manager. And more than twice as many of those who haven't had regular reviews tell us that they are unhappy or very unhappy compared to those who have had regular reviews. And quite frankly, I'm sure you'll all agree that that's just not good enough. And I'm sure it's something that could be fixed. So it's something to consider and take away and think about. Here are our quotes. A simple good morning could be all that it takes. And there's definitely scope for making sure managers have the right training to be good managers. So on to our recommendations. Support managers to have regular engagement, not necessarily just a formal review. Make sure managers are available on a range of shifts. So we hear a lot from night staff telling us that they rarely see or have an opportunity to meet with their manager. So make sure there is that flexibility there. I like this one. It's implementing what's been called a person-centered coaching style of supervision. And we talk about this day in, day out in the delivery of care, but how about applying the same rules to the rules of staff management as well? And where available, learning and development teams could support with developing toolkits to assist managers in providing positive engagement. It's not all bad, you'll be pleased to know. And we hear and see examples of fantastic managers all of the time. Here's one that we heard of just recently. We saw it on Twitter. Antonius from the Fremantle Trust, handing out coffee and donuts with a thank you during Carers Week. So simple, yet I suspect this had a massive impact on the team itself. And there are countless different opportunities to do this, and we're seeing it all of the time. So it's definitely happening. So as a sector, we focus on the recruitment and retention of frontline staff, and we know then some will move on to become managers and leaders in social care. When people leave, they tend to stay in the sector, but of course, climbing up the ladder, usually the exception, not the rule. And we've heard today the impact of management and leadership can have on retention. But as a sector, we are without doubt behind in promoting the opportunities that exist. Let's just remember that less than 10% of our workforce of adult social care is under the age of 24. That's our future talent. And early talent schemes just don't exist in the same way that they do in other sectors. And there's definitely less collaboration than we see elsewhere. It's quite frankly a dangerous position that we're in, and given the growth and the demand of the coming period and the coming decades, and the increasing competition for less young people due to declining birth rates, it's really concerning. And it would be fair to say that graduates are really quite unlikely to consider leadership roles in care. We're just not at the table. And we understand that, whilst we can apply pressure to MPs and government, there's also a range of things that we can do now. So what are those things? Promote the opportunities for early talent in your organisation for both frontline and management and leadership roles. The data is telling us that we're just not doing as good a job as we could. Engage with local schools, colleges, universities, and educate them around social care. Yes, there are bad days, but there are lots of good ones too. And it's a growing sector with all the same functions as the businesses. And at the moment, we've got a real added attraction for young people. We provide person-centered, high-value care, and we make a change to society. And young people want to hear and make a difference. We need to lay our stall out better. You can definitely get involved with the many initiatives we hear every week of taking place. This week alone, it's Care Home Open Week. There were over 400 locations taking part in a variety of virtual events when we last checked, showcasing all the wonderful work that goes on, the incredible people that are supported, the variety of volunteering and employment opportunities on offer. Care Home Open Week is a great way of engaging with those local communities that we've just talked about. And if you'd like any more information, do let us know, and we can certainly signpost accordingly. The other opportunity and an initiative that we wanted to mention now was Now Care, and Transform Society is in the process of a 3-month feasibility study into the potential of establishing an equivalent of Teach First, which you may be aware of, for care workers. It's funded by the CareTech Foundation, and the initiative has had input from a wide range of different leaders and providers from across the sector. And what the initiative aims to do is deliver lasting reputational change to the sector by delivering highly qualified, experienced and trained leaders, experienced and qualified future talent. And the registered manager role has been chosen as the starting point, with candidates attaining a registered manager or equivalent role within 2 years. So at the moment, Now Care are seeking buy-in, financial support directly from operators and the sector, to use it directly as a leverage for significant government investment as well. Again, if there's any interest or you'd like to know more about that, do let us know, and we can certainly signpost in the right direction there too. So some final considerations from me today. The reason why people are choosing to stay or leave in the main haven't massively changed. If we're completely honest, we're talking about the same things we were saying 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. However, everyone in the sector is operating on a higher degree of stress, anxiety, fear and grief, and we're hearing it. But with all that said, when communication and management is on point, when there's support for new starters, when there's consideration to the recommendations we've made, when we're considering a positive working environment, we believe there really is an opportunity to impact retention for yourselves. So what we'd say is, beyond your turnover statistics individually within your own organisations, remember to listen through retention, stay interviews, exit interviews, conducted by a real person who's experienced in listening. You can also, use quick temperature check surveys alongside those more in-depth surveys that will give you a flavour of what's happening. And there's definitely some apps and forms out there that can support with that. And once you've identified your areas or focused on retention, refer back to our key themes and recommendations. Figure out how you're going to implement the recommendations. I love the idea of having retention business partners in our organisations, there's lots of opportunities to really focus on retention and make a difference. So we hope that you've been able to reflect on what and how you're going to make changes and ultimately make a difference. So that's enough from me. Amanda, I'm going to hand back to you at this stage.
And now I'm off mute. Thank you very much, Dave. I was furiously typing some responses there. There's been lots of really interesting conversation and sharing of information in the chat room. So we'll pick up on that later, but certainly hope that's given you all lots of food for thought. And some things to consider about how you can impact your retention. So I'm going to hand over now to Juliet and Amanda at Skills for Care, who are going to be talking about workforce values, culture and well-being. Over to you, Juliet and Amanda.
Morning, everybody. So I'm going to begin our presentation talking a little bit about how values and culture can impact on the retention of your workforce. And Juliet, my colleague, who I'm hoping is still here because we've had some technical difficulties, and we'll be talking about the wellbeing and the wellbeing resources that we offer as well. Next, please. So we know that the cost of turnover for an organisation costs a lot of money, and we know the Chartered Institute for Personnel Development has estimated that it costs around £4,000 per employee to replace every time somebody leaves you. We conducted some research in 2017 called The Secrets of Success, where we interviewed employers that have got less than 10% turnover. And what they told us is essentially that where they applied a values-based recruitment approach to their processes, they had a 5.6% less turnover than those employers that were using traditional methods. So essentially, the values-based recruitment approach helps you recruit the people with the right values that want to stay with you. So all the things that Dave has been kind of talking about is all those things that he picks up during your recruitment and retention processes. Next, please. So we know retention is key, and constantly recruiting and replacing people has a knock-on effect on people's morale and how they interact with your service. So if you've got people that feel that they are being listened to and having their values that are reflected back in an organisation, then they're the ones that will feel that they are valued in the beginning. So values-based approach really is looking at what the values, behaviours and attitudes of those people are that you're trying to get into your organisation, and they're not reflected in traditional recruitment methods that just ask about skills and experience. It's more about, you know, what is it that you would do in a given situation, how have you behaved in a given situation before, and trying to tease out some of those more subtle things that aren't related to how, you know, how many years you've worked in adult social care before and what qualifications that you've got. So it looks way beyond somebody's job history and qualifications, and it gets to the heart of the real person that you're trying to attract into your organisation, because we know not everybody that applies to work in adult social care is the right person. It's not always the right fit. So it's making sure that we try and attract those that would be the right fit and help them to stay. Next, please. So why does it matter? So as I've said, whilst recruiting and retaining staff is a challenge in any climate, and we know COVID's had a massive impact, there have been lots of challenges around there, and while there have been some gains as far as attracting other people from other sectors because they've closed, we're also now starting to hear that that's causing another challenge as the other sectors are opening up and people are going back. So all of that is some things that you could be planning for. If we know that, you know, having the benefit of having more people coming and apply for you as sectors were closed was only going to be a short-term fix. It was never going to be a long-term process that was ever going to solve the situation. So what is it that we need to be doing all the way through is trying to make sure that what effort you're putting into your recruitment yields you the right people in the end in order to get them. So the value-based approach to both recruitment and your retention will help you recruit people that have got more respect, that have more empathy, have more compassion, and they overall perform better. Productivity is really important as far as trying to get people that want to do enough work to support your services. Next, please. So these are the kind of values that we're talking about. So these are just examples, and most organisations have got some form of values list that they may apply to. It might be on your website saying how you actually support the people that you're caring for. What we don't always see is those same values applied to the workforce, and it's being clear about what the values are that are applicable to your organisation. There can be a range of different ones, but they need to be lived and breathed. People need to understand what they are. I think I've seen a couple of examples in the past where an office has got all the values painted on the walls, so, you know, clearly visible. But if you asked a member of staff what the values were, they didn't know. And it's that they didn't translate what the actual values were into their day-to-day, everyday interactions in their work. Next, please. So a values-based approach should be involved in all areas of your recruitment and retention processes. And while it's important to have things promoted on your website, clearly communicated in your mission statements, and adverts and open days should all have the values embedded in them. Application forms and job descriptions and person specifications, pre-screening questionnaires, they should all be designed to be able to get the right person through to you and filtered through to you. In assessing people, values-based psychometrics and assessment tools, and I think Dave mentioned one that Cohesion have. There are lots of ones on the market, and some that are freely available to you as well. We've got a questionnaire that is one of those tools as well. But to keep people, having all of that through all of your processes in the attracting and applying should also be replicated in your induction, probation, supervision. We've heard lots from Dave about people not feeling heard, not feeling valued, not having enough opportunities to speak up, not engaging enough with their management. All those things are these areas where having your values embedded in them and having a process that can address those and reflect on them as they're in the, you know, in the early stages or further on down in their career, should all be looking at, you know, how are people feeling valued within our organisation? How is that reflected back as an organisation? Surveys are another way that can be sort of captured during somebody's employment. So it's making sure that all the processes have that sort of reflection around values all the way through. Next, please. So having you at the right values will often mean that you've got a right values-based culture. So if the culture is the place that has the character and the personality of your organisation, then having a positive workplace culture is vital to delivering high quality care and support. Next, please. So what is a positive workplace culture? So we conducted some research that said that services with good and outstanding CQC rating essentially had a fair, inclusive and transparent culture. And these examples were people who need care and support, people who need care and support at the heart of the service, and ensure managers and leaders were visible, open and approachable and empowering others. And again, it goes back to some of the data that Dave has mentioned earlier about people being approachable, being able to talk to the people that are supporting you. Next, please. What employers have told us is that increasingly seeing a positive workplace culture is always based on meaningful values and an engaged workforce where it's a two-way communication street, that there are opportunities to reflect and discuss and influence as they're going through, which creates a more person-centered approach to their care. Next, please. So ensure managers and leaders are encouraged and support a strong focus on inclusion, equality, diversity and human rights. So like I said, all those things that make people feel that they themselves are valued and what they contribute is valued and what their own background brings to their working life. And really and crucially, ensuring problems and concerns are always a priority and committed to resolving them, which includes the well-being of staff. If people are feeling they've got, you know, too much of a workload, they are feeling burnt out, where are those opportunities for them to discuss and highlight that and come and have solutions, discussions around, you know, how people are feeling. Next, please. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Juliet, who I'm hoping is here.
Can you hear me?
Excellent, thank you.
Oh, wonderful. It's showing that I'm on mute, but I'm actually dialed in on my phone. So we did a little brush around this morning trying to get organised, but we're okay. So thank you so much, Amanda. And I'm Juliet Green. I lead on the some of the delivery and coordination of our skills for care, wellbeing work. And as mentioned earlier, yes, it is a hot topic, but what does it really mean? And health and wellbeing relates to every aspect of working life, from the physical environment to the quality of work, the safety, and how people feel about the work that they're doing, and also, as mentioned, the organisational culture. And we know that stress and burnout are real key issues for the sector, and obviously with such difficult challenges, the workforce wellbeing has just never been so important. So next slide, please, just to talk about what do we know. And this came from a recent webinar that the Local Government Association conducted. And we know that the sector is going to be under real sustained pressure, and that people need that time to breathe, to reflect, to grieve, and to have that recovery opportunity. We know that the highest reported concerns for frontline workers is stress and anxiety, those COVID-related concerns, and sad feelings of sadness and depression. But we also know that peer support is really, really valued. And we've had feedback from our register manager networks, from providers that we've spoken to about some of the wellbeing initiatives that they've implemented, and that peer support just talking to somebody who gets it and understands what you're going through is really, really valued. So next slide, please. We do know that there are barriers to accessing health and wellbeing support, and these are a few that I've taken from a survey where people have talked about having the time, so whether that's being allowed time away from work, being given those permissions, or sometimes feeling they just don't have the time to access some support for themselves, not knowing what's available. There are concerns around lack of trust, just feeling too exhausted to know where to start, or not even admitting or recognizing that somebody needs some support, or recognizing it in yourself. And also some issues with IT around access, signing up for apps. I know we've talked quite a bit about culture, but on the next slide, what we're hearing about is adopting that real wellbeing culture and that wellbeing leadership. So on the next slide, we have how organisations have had open conversations about their own mental health. We've spoken to providers who've said that, you know, we've been really honest about how we're feeling, and that enables staff to open up about how they're feeling too, and validating that it's okay to find it tough, because it is. And also promoting those opportunities to create safe spaces for employees to talk about mental health and walking through it together. We've been gathering some sector stories. There's a link there on the slides. It's worth going and having a look. One of the stories was around staff bubbles, which supports the buddying situation, also for those new starters, having that opportunity to be part of a little group, whether that's 1 or 2 buddies to support you. And we know that it's clear that that compassionate culture drives good workforce wellbeing. We're working with our national partners to give wellbeing the attention that it deserves, and to have that real focus on leadership. So just thinking about your own organisational and team cultures, and how do you promote health and wellbeing within the workplace? So creating that culture where it's okay to talk about not feeling great, and reflecting on what you've been doing, what's been working well, what's not working so well. And we also have our effective supervision guides, and towards the start of the pandemic, we created some bite-sized supervision resources, again, all on our website, easy to find. And thinking about that real person-centered approach to supervision, really getting to know staff and understanding what really matters to them to be able to do a good job, and it being a person-centered focus rather than a task focus. And on the next slide, this is just something that to think about, where you do maybe have an opportunity to take a little bit of time to pause, and reflection can sometimes seem a bit of another thing to do in an already busy, crowded world, but it can be really empowering, and it can help to make sense of what's been happening, coming to help with decisions, taking action, setting new directions, and having that bit of an opportunity to discover new opportunities. And reflection can be really simple, just a case of let's take some time together, let's think about what we've learned over the past several months, what we've loved, what we've lacked, what we've longed for, some of the things that you want to keep doing, and other things that you maybe want to stop doing. And it's really important, because you can miss some real vital opportunities to learn and contribute ideas, enabling people to speak up and learning from that. So just on the next slide then, so just thinking about the resources that are available in response to the concerns that there's just so much stuff, it's really hard to find what you're looking for. We launched a wellbeing resource finder back in February this year. And the idea is that you can find, hopefully, what you're looking for within a few clicks. So that's by category, by audience. So we've collated resources from our trusted partners. So these are either specific to social care or relevant for social care. And we're regularly updating it. You can filter your results, you can save and print your results, you can email them to people, you can share the link with your staff team so they can go on and have a look round and maybe find something that can support them. So there's self-help, there's guidance, there's helplines in there. And we're also interested in feedback. If there's anything that you're doing or using that you think would benefit others, let us know. There is a pop-up, clever little pop-up that comes up when you're on the site to give us some feedback. So please do that. And just to finish off then on the last slide, just thinking about our other wider offers, and with the people from BAME communities accounting for 1 in 5 of the adult social care workforce, we've been acutely aware of the challenges facing through the pandemic and highlighted some of those challenges for communities. We've undertaken surveys, webinars, peer coaching to learn more and to help provide the best possible support. So take a look, again, there's a link on the website there. We have our registered manager support, there's networks in each area, our advice line, and support from your area teams. There in your area you can find who your locality manager is, and they're also aware of the local offers. Most areas are setting up local hubs, wellbeing hubs to support health and social care staff. Some are already in existence, some are being set up over the coming months, so it's worth finding out what's available in your area. And we also have our 30-minute recorded webinar series that we started last year. It's been really popular and we have more sessions coming through. We're planning one in August on recovery and reflection, and there's one a bit later on in the year, I think it's around October time, around supervision. So that's all from me. So hopefully we'll be able to find something. We'll be sharing the slides after the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Juliet and Amanda. That was, as I mentioned at the beginning, that there's so many tools, insights, and areas that I'm sure everyone will be exploring. There's been some activity in the chat as well, and interest in finding out more about, particularly around the Value Award scheme from Roxanne. So Roxanne will certainly follow up with you and share more information on that. But without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to James Sage now, partner, the health and social care practice at Royds Withy King. Over to you, James.
Thanks very much, Amanda. As Amanda said, I'm James Sage. I'm an employment lawyer and I head the health and social care team at Royds Withy King Solicitors. So we specialise in advising care providers on legal and regulatory matters. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm hoping that as many of you as possible will be able to stay on. As an inducement, the last point I'm going to be covering is around COVID vaccination, and I'm going to give you some practical tips on how you can prevent a retention cliff edge when that comes into force. So hopefully that's worth staying on for. Amanda's asked me to give a legal perspective on staff retention challenges and some of the solutions. I have a team of lawyers who are advising providers on these sorts of issues on a daily basis, so we can give you some kind of practical insights into what we see as the key issues. As we know, retention has been a challenge for a long time in the sector, with on average 30% of staff leaving their job each year, and that's compared to an average in the country of 11% outside of social care, so significantly more challenging. And now, if you could move on to the first slide, and the next one as well. But now we're facing a potential iceberg with real issues around a mental health crisis in the sector, immigration restrictions, and mandatory COVID vaccination, which could result in significant numbers of staff being lost from the sector. And this is at a time when we've got real pressure from other sectors which are emerging from COVID. For example, it's been reported there are 188,000 vacancies in the hospitality sector, for example. And those sectors are increasing pay and offering bonuses as an inducement to attract staff. There's no getting past the fact that it's going to be a very, very challenging time for HR teams. But I think the key is to focus on the things that you can control and not worry too much about those that you can't, like government decisions to make vaccination mandatory. So the first thing I would say, if we can move to the next slide, is it's really key to create a positive retention environment. And this just builds upon what Skills for Care have just been talking about. So it's really key as a starting point to have an open and transparent culture, that you have vision and values that are embraced and lived in practice by staff, and that you genuinely care for your people. In addition to that, it's really key that you've got strong and effective leadership, and that's not just at senior management level, that's across the organisation, and that your organisational management, so your kind of HR operation, is open, fair, consistent, and most importantly, proactive. And I'll come back to that. And the other kind of point is making sure that you've got an effective employee engagement plan. So these should be highlighting the steps that you're taking to ensure that staff are highly engaged in their employment. So that's looking at continuous learning and improvement, making sure they're operating at their highest skill level, and appreciation for their achievements, and also making sure that they've got a voice and that they're involved in decisions that the organisation is making. Next slide, please. As we've heard, well-being is probably one of the most significant things that you need to be focusing on at the moment from a retention perspective. It's a really high-risk area. And to give you some context, in the first wave, a survey by the IPPR found that 50% of care staff suffered a mental health decline and 71% of 18 to 34-year-olds. And then after the first wave, a separate survey found that 58% of staff in care met the threshold for a mental health disorder, 22% met the criteria for PTSD, and 47% had significant anxiety and 47% depression. So that is a significant and worrying context for a conversation around retention. If you could move to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but there's been a recent report by the Health and Social Care Committee in Parliament on what some of the causes of the wellbeing crisis are, particularly around COVID related. But the important point I'd make is that in addition to all of those workplace issues, there are a lot of personal issues that are likely to be ongoing at the moment that you really need to try and discuss with staff and see if you can do anything to support. For example, many will have partners that have been furloughed or will be at risk of being made redundant. And financial well-being is a significant catalyst for mental health as well. So what are some of the solutions? Well, I think the key, if you wouldn't mind just moving to the next slide, is to keep it as simple as possible. So having an open culture where you can, so I've got 3 key steps, I think, to this from an employment law perspective. The first is making sure that you've got a really open culture so that you can discuss with staff their well-being and their mental health. Asking staff to complete well-being surveys is really good because it enables you to gauge where people are and it starts that conversation. But ultimately, managers need to take it upon themselves to start those conversations with staff and create that open environment. The next is to make sure that you're identifying any potential triggers for a well-being relapse. This will be different for different people, so you really need to listen carefully to what the triggers might be for them, and make sure that you're then putting in any necessary adjustments to try and prevent those triggers being triggered. And that's really key. So you might have a plan for individual staff about what those triggers are and how they can be prevented. And the third point is providing support. So being proactive and looking at things that you can do before there's a problem is really important. So individual wellbeing plans which give guidance and specific information around, for example, self-care, so what staff can do to try and look after themselves. Also looking at coping strategies, thinking about whether training is needed around resilience and bereavement, and then looking at possibly the need for professional support from medical experts, and then signposting to external support, for example, the Care Workers Charity or other helplines and support lines that staff might be able to use. So I think the key with this is to keep it simple, which is why I've honed it down to a 3-step process. If I could have the next slide, please. The next area, which I think is really important for you to consider, is your HR management. So the way that you deal with your people and your staff. And it's really fundamental that you do this in a way which is open, fair, consistent, and most importantly, proactive. We see lots of problems arising because people issues are not dealt with in that sort of way, and often that can lead to the loss of staff in circumstances where it may not have been necessary. And it can also have a real negative impact on staff morale. On the slide, you can see the 5 most common kind of HR risk areas that we see in practice. The first one is ineffective whistleblowing culture. There was a survey which during the pandemic, which found that there'd been a 66% increase in complaints made by care staff directly to CQC during the pandemic. And that's worrying that they're going to CQC rather than to their employer as a first port of call. And that does suggest problems either with culture, with staff engagement, or with the relationship between the employer and the staff. And so the way to address that is, again, making sure that you've got a really open and transparent whistleblowing culture. So staff are reassured and reminded that you want them to raise these concerns, and they're positively encouraged to do so, but raising them with you internally first. And then making sure that any issues that are identified are addressed and any mistakes are learned from. And that will just build some confidence in your procedures. It's also really important to make sure that managers are aware of the increased risk of whistleblowing disclosures during COVID, because there is a significantly increased risk, which has translated in a significant increase in employment tribunal claims for whistleblowing. And it's important to remember that whistleblowing concerns could be verbal, they're not necessarily written, and they almost certainly won't say this is a whistleblowing concern. So sometimes it can be quite subtle. So you just need to ensure that staff know, or managers in particular, know how to spot them. And you also need to be really careful about what to do with concerns that turn out to be unfounded, because taking action against staff who raise genuine concerns, even if they are unfounded, will not only result in a loss of confidence about your whistleblowing process, but also create a risk of employment tribunal claims as well. The next area is around workplace conflict, and ACAS recently submitted a report on this, and they estimate that just under 500,000 employees resign each year due to conflict at work. And that conflict also leads to increased sickness absence, which in itself leads to people ultimately leaving organisations. So I think it's really worth you thinking about how you can manage potential workplace disputes. For example, thinking about mediation or some other sort of dispute resolution, and try and avoid, which often happens, resolution by grievances. So different members of staff throwing grievances at each other really does not help and is not conducive to a good working relationship. So if there are alternatives, try and use those and do it early on before the relationship problems become entrenched and it's more difficult to resolve them, and ultimately people then leave. The next one is around performance management, and we see lots of problems arising with care clients in this respect. I think managers are often put off dealing with performance because it's seen as quite a daunting process, but it really shouldn't be. It should be a positive and proactive process that starts at the beginning of employment through inductions and training and supervision, and continues with setting and reviewing objectives, constructive feedback, and peer mentoring. All of those with the aim of continuous performance improvement. Because ultimately what you need to achieve is a high performance culture, because that keeps staff engaged, it keeps in particular your best staff engaged, and it prevents performance issues, which might ultimately mean that you need to dismiss staff who aren't able to perform properly in the role. And if you invest in staff in terms of training and supervision and objectives, then you're giving them the best possible chance to perform to the standard that you want them to and to be successful. Similarly with sickness absence, and I will use the word proactive a lot because I see a lack of proactivity as being one of the biggest causes of problems, which ultimately lead to staff leaving the business. Sickness absence is often not dealt with proactively, and often that's done out of managers wanting to be sympathetic to staff. So they feel that proactively managing the absences could have come across as harsh or might not be a nice thing to do. But actually what we see is that it's not actually beneficial for the employee or the business for it not to be dealt with proactively. And there's good evidence to show that the longer the time someone's off work with sickness absence, the less likely they are to ever return. So get your medical evidence, occupational health report or GP report really early when someone's off, so at the 4 to 6 week absence period, and then focus on what adjustments could be made and what support might be needed in order to get them back to work as soon as possible. And the final point is around equality and diversity. And obviously there's lots of things that we could say about embracing equality and diversity to have a positive impact on staff retention. But the one I wanted to mention, which is starting to get quite a lot of attention in the press, is around the menopause. And this is particularly relevant to the care sector because Skills for Care data shows that 82% of the adult social care workforce are female. The average age is 44 and 27% are aged 55 and above. And there's really clear evidence that menopause leads to significant loss of women in the workplace. As many as 25% think about leaving their jobs and 10% do leave their jobs. And 90% say that their employers offer no support. And the symptoms and experience of women can be really significant from a health perspective, and it can be really difficult to get appropriate health support as well. So think about how you can raise awareness and support staff, and think about getting a policy in place so that they know that support is there as well. So then to move on to the next slide, please, which is around mandatory vaccination. So as if retention wasn't hard enough, we've now got the government proposing to make vaccination mandatory at a time when we've currently got 20% of the entire workforce unvaccinated. So this is not going to make life easier from a retention perspective. In terms of the current status, the regulations making this a requirement have been presented to Parliament, and we expect Parliament to ratify those after a debate prior to 23rd of July when the Parliament goes on summer recess. And from that point, there should then be a 16-week grace period with the regulations coming into effect from end of October, beginning of November. So that's what we think at the moment. So you've got a period of time, but not that long, to do what you can to try and prevent significant loss of staff if many of your workforce are unvaccinated. The requirement is going to be that two doses of the vaccine are going to be needed in order for anyone, any staff, to cross the care home threshold. So it is limited to care homes at the moment. But it doesn't apply to staff that are just working outside, for example, a gardener. The Department of Health and Social Care issued a stakeholder questionnaire document, and those of you on our mailing list will have received an update about that yesterday. And that is indicating that the exemptions for people who won't need to be vaccinated is going to be very limited. We previously thought that potentially women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, or people with religious beliefs might be exempt because of discrimination rights, but the government is not taking that approach, and none of those people will be exempt. Only pregnant women will only be exempt if there's an additional medical reason why they shouldn't have the vaccine. So the only real exemption is going to be medical grounds, which is much more limited than what we thought. So what is the impact going to be on retention? If you wouldn't mind just moving to the next slide, please. Well, as I said, we've got 20% of the workforce unvaccinated. We ran a webinar for care providers a week or so ago, when I think it was the day after the regulations were announced. And we ran a poll. So we had about 120 providers, I think. And we ran some polls on what impact we thought providers thought this was going to have. So 35% of those said that they had less than an 80% staff take up of the vaccine, of which 18% said they had less than a 60% take up. And we know that things are particularly difficult in the southeast of the country. And so there is a risk there of significant numbers of staff being lost, with pretty significant impact on the business. We also asked the question of providers of what was their view on how many of their staff who are currently unvaccinated would change their mind when they know that the government's going to make it mandatory. And 60% said that less than 10% of their staff are likely to change their mind. And a further 18% said that only 10 to 25% would change their mind. So on the whole, providers think that the mandatory nature of the requirement isn't going to be sufficient to get staff over the line in terms of being vaccinated. We do have some anecdotal evidence from Barchester's experience, because they introduced this as a requirement a month or two ago. And I don't have any specific insight into this other than what's been publicly revealed. And they said that since they made it mandatory, they ended up with 99% of staff willing to have the vaccine. And I think that means, that I think they've got around 12,000 staff. So that's about 1% to 120 staff out of all of those who are still unwilling to have it. So that potentially provides some comfort. If that plays out in practice for other providers, is that once it becomes mandatory, that choice of having to have it or losing your job, potentially that might mean that more staff take that decision. But I think we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, there are some groups where it's going to be more difficult than for others. So what steps can you take now? If you wouldn't mind just moving on to the final slide. So I think for new staff, you can make this a mandatory now. I think that you need to take account of discrimination risks. So you would need exemptions for staff who are pregnant or people who are objecting on religious grounds, because at the moment you wouldn't have a justification for that discrimination, because this isn't yet in law. But what this will mean is that hopefully it will encourage or you'll be ensuring that as many new staff as possible are vaccinated, which will then mean you won't have a kind of retention problem with those staff later down the line if they then subsequently decide not to be vaccinated. With your existing staff, I think step one is to identify who hasn't had both doses. So for those who've only had one dose, find out why they haven't had the second. Did they have some health complications and that's why they're objecting, and what are they now going to not have the second one? Will they, if it becomes mandatory, change their mind and do that? So I think you need to give people as much time as possible to weigh up their options and decide what they're going to do. So starting as soon as possible is really key. For those that are exempt, I think you need to identify those and start thinking about how you're going to request evidence. The government's talking about there being evidence through an NHS app, but based on previous experience and the need to try and start doing things early, I would just get on and see if you can get any evidence from their GP or medical professionals about an exemption. For those that aren't willing to have both doses, then you need to know who those people are, and you need to start a process, which I'm sure you've already done, but you need to start probably a more formal process of information and encouragement. So sharing the latest guidance, listening in detail to their specific concerns. Don't make this a tick box exercise. Listen to what their specific concerns are and talk through the guidance and see if their concerns can be overcome. Now, this will, I think, take time, and I don't think that it's worth being, for managers having these conversations, trying to be enforcing this on staff, because I think that could be counterproductive. I think it's all about listening, not pressurizing, but just giving the evidence and the information and letting people reach their own conclusions, but taking the time to do that. And I think it's well worth giving your managers some guidance on what the best way of handling those conversations is. One of the biggest groups that are not wanting the vaccine, from our experience of speaking to clients, is those who are young women planning a family or who are pregnant. And as I said, there's no expectation that they're going to be exempt unless there's a separate medical condition. So with this group, I think potentially you could do something collectively if there's a large number of them, or individually. But I think that you could be, the difficulty with this group is that the guidance was initially suggesting they shouldn't be having the vaccine, and obviously that's now changed, and the government isn't expecting to exempt them. So I think talking through that change in guidance, which they might not be aware of, making sure they're speaking to their medical professionals who will and should be saying, we think it's safe for you to be vaccinated. But ultimately just putting them in a position where they can make an informed decision. You can't force someone in this position to be having the vaccine, and they may make a legitimate decision not to have it. But I think the best you can do is give them all of the facts and information so they can make that decision. And hopefully if they feel comfortable with it, they will do so. And as I said, the key with all of this is to start early, because if the law comes into effect, say, end of October, beginning of November, we will know it's going to become law hopefully by the end of July. You need to make sure that you're fitting in as much of that process of information and consultation, so that people have got time to actually reconsider their options, particularly women who are planning to start a family and have concerns, or who are pregnant. They need time to change their mindset and think about what their options are, because otherwise they'll just say no, and you will have lost those staff. And we've got clients with 300 staff who are currently refusing to be vaccinated. So clients with big workforces, so where there's a potentially really significant risk of what impact that's going to have on the organisation as a whole. So I think it's really worth putting effort into this final piece of information and consultation, and talking through what the government is proposing, I think is helpful as well. So at the moment, many staff might think that they'll be exempted, but it's unlikely that's going to be the case. To have that conversation so that they can make an informed decision. Okay, so that's everything from me. Amanda, back over to you.
Thanks very much, James. As suspected, the most flurry of questions were around the vaccinations. So I've got a few. I'm very conscious people need to leave to go to other meetings. Just to put your minds at ease, we will be sharing all the questions with answers afterwards. But as we do still have quite a formidable group listening, I'm going to go to some of those questions. But I guess my reflection is, I mean, James, there's some new stats in there, and some very concerning stats around mental health and well-being, and similar to some of the information Dave shared, a real theme that a lot of this sits with management, whether it's the operational manager or the HR manager, for the people that can really have that influence, albeit it might be incremental in some of the areas that we've spoken about. So the vast majority of us on this call are leaders in the organisation. So I think some really good direction there. Thank you. So on to a couple of questions. Shani asked the question, are the government proposing care homes for older people first? Is it only for care homes for older people, or all care homes for all types of residents?
Yeah, it is. So originally it was just for older people, but after the consultation, the government has now confirmed that it's going to be for any care home. So they're not making a distinction between them, just for the team.
Right. Okay. And I thought, Vicky,
registered home. Yeah.
Thank you. Vicky Heenan also asked the question. So given this is now mandated and it's moving forward, becoming law, being debated, does that mean, do you think there are any plans for flu vaccinations to be legislated for moving forward?
I think that's quite possible. So the second consultation around making this mandatory for community care, NHS, I think is also potentially going to include making flu vaccination mandatory as well. So yeah, that might well be on the agenda.
Wow. Interesting times ahead for all of us, and as we keep saying in all of the presentations, these challenges are going nowhere. So Jasmine Harcourt had a question. So we talked about pregnancy. There's been quite a lot of comments about that in the chat box. What if you're trying to get pregnant?
Yeah, so the government aren't planning to make. So the concern is that the vaccination has an impact on fertility. The government position is that it does not create any risk at all, and therefore they are not making, you're not going to be exempt from the requirement to be vaccinated if you're thinking of planning a family. And actually, I think that some of the senior nurses who are speaking to providers and organisations about this are kind of turning it on its head and saying, actually, the best thing you can do for your future or unplanned, future baby, for example, is to have the vaccination, so they've got the antibodies and won't be at risk. Now, I'm not in a position to comment on, on whether that's right or wrong. Yeah. But that's certainly what the government's position is.
Yeah. So certainly, I mean, I it's a very emotive issue, particularly when you're talking around issues of pregnancy or religious beliefs. So yeah, a potential minefield, and as we said, one that's not going away. I suspect you're going to get a lot of follow-up questions. There's been lots of really lots of questions around will we be sharing the slides, will we be sharing the presentations? We're going to share everything, guys, so don't worry about it. I'm very conscious of time. Thank you for bearing with us. We did run over a little bit, but I hope you agree it's relevant, it's valid, and it was all very, very useful. So thank you so much to all of our guest speakers, to James, to Amanda, to Juliet, to Dave, and to Anna. There's all sorts of follow-up, and we've talked about so many things. There's links, there's toolkits, there's groups, but equally, if you want to talk specifically about Care Home Open Week, about Now Care, about care and support jobs and posting your roles on there, about joining the different mailing lists, we'll make sure that we signpost you very clearly in the follow-up from this event. We'll also be inviting you all to join our forum group on LinkedIn, which is a great way, not so much for us to send stuff for you, but for all of you to continue that conversation that was started today. And thank you to all of you who shared some insights from what you've done, from graduate programs to paying and incentivizing buddies. That's excellent. And one of the main reasons we do this event is to share best practice, collaborate, and hear and learn what each other are doing and what the impact of that is. So I'm going to thank you all for your time now, and hope to see you at our next event, which will be focusing specifically on different routes to market and how you can engage with bank workers as a way of keeping that agency spend low, as many people have seen it come down during COVID times. So look out for that. And thank you all very much.